Evening. I'm calling the Stadium Authority special meeting to order. Could you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for our statement of values? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Together we humbly seek blessings upon this meeting. Wisdom so that we may act in the best
Thank you. Please be seated. Roll call. Assistant City Clerk.
Councilmember Authority Member Mahan. Here. Authority Member Hardy. Here. Authority Member O'Neill.
Here.
Authority Member Davis. Authority Member Watanabe. Here. And Authority Member Shahal.
Here.
And Chair Gilmore.
Here.
Here.
Second.
Motion second to excuse Authority Member Davis. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? That passes. Did we actually vote? Okay. Passes.
Madam Mayor, shall I read
Yes.
the AB 23 announcement is members of the Santa Clara Stadium Authority, Sports and Open Space Authority, and Housing Authority are entitled to receive $30 for each attended meeting. Statement of Behavioral Standards. The City of Santa Clara has adopted a code of ethics and values and behavioral standards for public meetings to promote and maintain the highest levels of conduct. This includes mutual respect, robust discussion, and allowing city business to be done in an efficient and consistent manner. Please note that as the presiding officer, the mayor's direction in matters of process and decorum should be followed, and that use of the gavel indicates all conversations must conclude, and everyone in attendance should come to order and attention. Welcome and thank you for your participation. In addition, registered lobbyists appearing in lobbying capacity are required to identify themselves as such and disclose the clients and or organizations that he or she represents at any meeting held with city officials or at public meetings pursuant to City Code Section 2.155.110. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Continuances and exceptions. Do we have any continuances or exceptions from anyone? All right, seeing none, public presentations. If any member of the public would like to make a presentation, please come forward. Now's the time to make a presentation on anything that's not on the agenda. Okay, seeing none, we're going down to now our general business. Our first item for action is action on the proposed Santa Clara Stadium Authority fiscal year 2019-20 budget and stadium operation and maintenance plan. Executive Director.
Good evening. We just have a brief presentation for the board this evening. So again, for our agenda, we'll start with some of the provisions and the requirements within the management agreement. We'll go through the budget development schedule, and as part of the budget development schedule, we will provide an update of activities since last week, study session. I'll pass it over to our finance director, Angie, so that she can review the Stadium Authority operating budget, our budget risk, as well as our debt budget and capital budget. So I'll hand it off to Brian for the couple of slides.
So this first slide is a recital from the management agreement, and the management agreement, if the board will recall, this management agreement was awarded to Manco without a competitive process on the basis of the fact that it was that Stadco was the lessee of the stadium, and in coming to this agreement, the certain recitals were stated, and one of the key recitals was that the stadium manager is an organization whose principals have substantial experience and expertise in the management and operation of public assembly facilities. So they held themselves out as persons who were professionally capable of performing the duties under the management agreement. This one? So again, I refer you to the standard of care that we referred to last week. This is the standards by which the stadium manager is responsible to perform their duties. They must exercise prudent, commercially reasonable, good faith efforts in managing. They're supposed to manage the stadium as a quality NFL and multi-purpose public sports, public assembly, exhibit, and entertainment facility to a standard of care, standard of quality comparable to other facilities. They're supposed to control their operating expenses and maximize their operating revenues.
So last week at the study session, we went through the milestones that we had agreed to for the budget development. Just wanted to refresh your memory that we're at the last milestone here, March 27th, where we are asking for a consideration on the proposed budget. Since last week's study session, I just wanted to share with you a couple of activities in case there's any questions on some of the open items that we noted last week. We still have not received any supporting documentation for the drop in revenue from the management company with respect to fiscal year 18-19 or for the projection for fiscal year 19-20. We also have not received any supporting documentation for justifying their additional request that came in late Thursday, I believe it was March 14th, for an additional $2.8 million. We've also received no response on our concerns with respect to the reasonableness of the issues that we raised for the marketing plan and our concern with achieving mutual agreement, as well as any concerns from the board's comments. We did, however, send them a copy of a sample marketing plan from Spectra for their West Palm Beach marketing strategy for that facility so that they can have an example of a more ideal and strategic marketing effort. I also want to note, as part of your post-agenda material, there is a document that's referenced as Manco Stadium Authority Budget Submission Comparison. Angie can speak to this in a little bit more clarity and per the agreement, but this is a document that is a budget. Well, let me just read the bullet and then I'll go into some of the details. Management company has amended the stadium operations budget, which is commonly referred to as the SOB, and submitted it to the collateral trustee under the stadium loan documents without advising the stadium authority of their changes prior to submitting it. So we received a revised stadium operations budget this morning, and thanks to Tyler and Angie, they were able to go through the granular level of line by line, and they put this chart together just to show you some of the changes. And I want to put them in the record because we'll want to look into this a little bit more clearly since it was submitted without advising us in advance of the changes. So for instance, I'll call your attention to the Stadium Authority cost. The revised submittal that they have draws down our proposal and recommendation to the board by $115,000 for the use of maintaining our G&A budget and cost. And if you look at other expenses, which we talked about last week, where we had noted that they had raised their expenses to about $1 million, they've maintained that, and we're showing here in the amended budget based on last week's conversation that we are proposing 110. So there is some material differentials. We shared some of the lower line items where the financials aren't as different, but the changes I thought were important to put in the record in that they've preserved their other expenditures while drawing down the G&A for the Stadium Authority. We'll have to look into this more and understand what next steps we'll take. So as part of your budget, you have the transmittal letter that we went over last week, the organizational chart, general information, as well as a year-end review of activities and accomplishments, as well as a work plan. There is the operating budget, which is on an accrual basis, as well as our debt service budget, and our capital budget. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Angie.
Thank you. Evening.
Good evening. So a lot of this will look very familiar based on our study session last week. Again, this slide shows you the 4 entities that are revolved around the Stadium Authority. The City of Santa Clara owns the land, and we ground lease to the Santa Clara Stadium Authority. The Santa Clara Stadium Authority owns the stadium, and then we lease the stadium to Stadco during the NFL season for 6 months, and then Stadco leases the stadium to the 49ers Football Company, and then Manco, our management company, receives funding from managing the stadium from both the Santa Clara Stadium Authority and Stadco. This is a flow chart that shows our budget. You can see the first box shows you the operating budget is $73.6 million, debt service is $51.6, and the CapEx is $14.2. And then we back out the transfers because the operating budget includes $51.3 million in transfers to the capital and the debt service. So you have a total net Stadium Authority budget of $88.1 million. So revenues are still at $73.6 million. We're still maintaining the non-NFL event revenue number that we had presented to you at the study session. Again, as the executive director mentioned, the management company told us this number will be $750,000, but we haven't had any support, so we don't feel comfortable reducing. Oh, I'm sorry, this one is 1920. That was for 1819. So actually for this one, the management company has given us $175,000. And so we have not seen any support for that, so we're maintaining it at that. On the expenses, again, we're a balanced budget at $73.6 million. I do want to draw your attention to the second box here. Based on the feedback from the study session, the board did not seem comfortable with including $200,000 in that line item, so we took it down to the $110,000, which is the actual cost for the bank fees that we currently have to pay. And then also above, you can see the 3 items, which is the senior and youth fees, ground rent, and performance rent. And these are the items that are paid to the city. Again, the performance rent, we budgeted $2.7 million, but as you know, this is based on the net non-NFL event revenue number. So if it really does come in at $175,000, I have a slide later on, that'll be $0 that is paid to the city's general fund. So we just want to show you the general and administrative budget. So the total, based on the percentage of all the staff that charges to the stadium, comes out to 3.8 full-time equivalent employees. And then we include the board stipends, the audit services, legal services, community outreach, noise monitoring, and public safety, and then as well as other expenses and executive director and board directives funding. So that makes up 3%. Our G&A budget makes up 3% of the total expense budget of $73.6 million. It's not very large in the scheme of things. So for the discretionary fund, we show you what our beginning balance is. We're projecting that we will bring in $616,000, and we have budgeted $250,000 just for initiatives or anything if something comes up and we need to spend that money. So we're projecting an ending balance of $2.3 million. The performance rent calculation, as I mentioned earlier, it's based on the net non-NFL event revenue, and this just walks you through. You begin with the ground rent plus the net non-NFL event revenue, and then we have to take a credit of the half of the ground rent, so you can follow along and see that that's how we get to the $2.7 million of performance rent paid to the city. So the 18-19, the current year, we do have some budget risk. As I mentioned, Manco provided a projected net revenue amount of $750,000 for this current year. This would result in a performance rent of $215,000 that would be paid to the city. And we currently have in the city's general fund the $2.6 million budgeted. So this would be a $2.4 million loss to the city's general fund for this current year. Manco did not provide supporting documentation for the fiscal year 18-19 projection, despite requests by the Stadium Authority staff, and this required that the Stadium Authority staff depart from the approach where we were doing trying to do the gross gross NFL revenues and expenses. So we had to go back to the net number, which I know the board had wanted to keep seeing how we were doing on the gross level. Stadium Authority staff projected $4 million based on the following. We analyzed the event makeup compared to prior years, and then we also had the draft profit and loss statements, or P&L statements, that were prepared by Manco for each event, and they do not show this loss. So we put together this table, and you can see the last column, which is 18-19, and you can kind of follow along and see how we projected how we think that we're going to come out at basically $4 million. There were 3 concerts. We've had 4 football events, non-NFL, 3 soccer events, and then we had some miscellaneous events. So you can see it's very similar to the 17-18 makeup. It's, I think, one difference, and can't see, it looks like we had 1 additional concert in 17-18, and then 2 additional miscellaneous event items. So, and in that year, we came out at $5.2 million. So we don't feel like the $4 million is that off based on this analysis. For the 19-20, which is the budget that we are currently reviewing, Manco are going to be adopting tonight. Manco was unable to provide a projection for the non-NFL events for 19-20. We were not able to budget at the gross level because they didn't provide us the gross level for 18-19, which we would have then used as our estimate for the next year. So again, this is just repetitive, but we projected the $5.8 million and the $2.7 for the performance rent. This is a visual of if the net non-NFL revenue does come in at 175, as I mentioned earlier. You can see that the calculation comes out to we will receive more ground rent than we would receive performance rent. And we wanted just to kind of, as a refresher, to show you, these are the $2.8 million in additional costs that were submitted to the Stadium Authority on March 14th. We have listed the description there, 1.1 for buffet services, and then SBL services for ticket operations, another $100,000, and then some various staffing costs. But there's not been any support on why those costs are necessary. For the debt service, we have $51.7 million, 51.6, with principal of 34.9 and interest of 16.7, and then total outstanding debt is projected to decrease by the principal from $340.1 million to $305.2 million. And here again, this is my favorite slide, just to show you how much the debt is going down. So for the capital budget, this did go down. If you look at your prior, from the study session, we did take out the gate for the soccer field project. So now it's $14.2 million. We have stadium improvements of $12.7. These do include the carryover for the community room and includes fencing on Tasman, and also public safety equipment. And then we also have the stadium warranty-related construction of $1.5, which has been a carryover from the original construction. And then my note here, we did withdraw that parking gates at the youth soccer field. So in conclusion, the budget is balanced between revenues and expenditures, but does not include the new information that we received on March 14th. I think we need more analysis on that, and if it's warranted, we'll come forward with a budget amendment later in the year. It maintains the required reserves per the agreements for operating, discretionary, and capital funds. It maintains debt service commitment and identifies anticipated excess revenue that can be used toward debt. It invests in strategic capital expenditures, provides for greater transparencies of expenditures. As you know, and I mentioned at the study session, this document has gotten better and better every year. We've added more schedules, more narratives to help the reader understand it. As I mentioned earlier, additional budget adjustments may be required after thorough review of the March 14th budget submittal. And these last-minute developments with new information raise serious questions about how Manco is managing the city's asset and cause for concern of standard of care. So with that, we'd like to recommend that the board adopt the Santa Clara Authority fiscal year 19-20 operating debt service and capital budget. Again, it does not include the $2.8 million, and the other expenses were reduced from $200,000 to $110,000. Also to approve the Santa Clara Stadium Authority fiscal year 1920 Stadium Operations and Maintenance Plan, or SOMP, excluding the marketing plan. Staff is not, as you know from the study session, staff is not recommending approval of the 2019 marketing plan at this time. And approve the Stadium Authority compliance and management policy. With that, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Authority Member Mahan.
Thank you. Actually, I think you answered the question that I had in your presentation, but I want to clarify. So I understand we have to get a budget approved so we can operate. So if it doesn't meet the projected budget figures that we're going to approve tonight, assuming we do, then there would be a budget amendment process that we can reform the budget at some point in the future if we're not meeting those projections?
Sure. On the expenditure side, if revenues don't come in as projected, we should still have plenty of revenue to cover. It would not be transferred over into debt. It'd be less transferred over to debt.
Okay,
so
thank you.
We would probably come forward. And if it's a drastic number like that, we'd want to message it to the board, so we would do that.
Any other questions from the Authority Member O'Neill?
Yeah, thank you. So I guess, you know, kind of a little bit to tag on to what Authority Member Mahan said. I mean, Mike, I'm concerned, you know, obviously I think we all are about that, you know, the stadium manager is projecting these severe drops in revenue and rather large levels of increase in expenses. And so I guess, you know, we're going to have to, you know, in the past, some of us, as we've been continuing to ask for more information, and I think this is the first time that we've seen actual numbers like of FTEs that Manco has hired and you know, actually like listing all these capital improvements that now have to be made. And so my concern is that, you know, even if we don't allow for some of these expenses, like, so say that if we don't approve all of that capital, then obviously then they can't go ahead and make those, spend that money, correct? I mean, they can't go ahead, because it seems like now we're trying to be in a process where we're going to be looking at contracts and asking them to come for approval. So some of these expenses that were fairly high, and I think caught some of us off guard, and you know, and I don't really have a basis of knowledge to say, gee, do we really need to replace all the furniture in the clubs? I mean, I don't know. So, but they can't go ahead then and spend money if we don't approve it, correct?
And they can't spend, we have the funds for the capital, the CapEx, and we have the budget. So we don't have to pay, or we don't have to, on the capital side, you could say you don't want to approve certain projects, but it is our asset. So there's some safety. When we did go through that and look at it and see if there were ones we felt comfortable calling out. And there's some that have a health and safety risk. We just didn't want to do that. But I think the executive director can say we've already been instructed not to pay any more capital projects unless we have they have to give us the contract first, bid documents, say, you know, let us know if they're complying with prevailing wage, and then several other. We did put them on notice on that today.
So this is just purely to establish budget authority. It doesn't mean that there's the authority to go and begin to expend. We have put them on notice, given the recent issues and the next item around serious compliance issues with procurement and compliance with the state prevailing law statutes. And so we have stated to them that they need to demonstrate that they are in compliance, or else we're not going to be paying off of invoices that are in releasing public funds that cannot be substantiated with the agreement terms that they've executed to.
Okay, great, thank you. So my other concern is with the revenues. You know, they're projecting revenues very much lower than what we've been seeing the last few years. I know from my discussions that I've had with members of the Manco team, where they've told me, well, you know, they have said, to be realistic, you're not going to have like a lot of really big events. You know, that's just not realistic. But still, it's, you know, it seems like we haven't had that much deviation. So to all of a sudden to expect like it's almost would be like we're not going to have any big events. And so my concern is almost like, is there going to be an attempt to have a self-fulfilling prophecy here? Like, this is what we projected. I guess my concern is to make sure that for some reason they've come in with a very low number of revenue. Are they really going to be out there doing everything they could to make sure that those revenue numbers, as our, in the marketing area, are what we've, had in the last few years when we've actually wanted to see an increase in events that, at least events that will be profitable. So I guess, so it's almost like, so what do we do to make sure that they're really, to just get to the standard of care? I mean, I would hate to think that somebody would not be performing at their best level, and then say, well, we told you that this wasn't going to, the revenues were going to be low, and we were right. That's why I kind of feel like I said, a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's correct, and that's why we continue to work off of the standard of care requirements, as well as the marketing plan. The marketing plan is supposed to be the strategy that they're going to employ in order to meet those standard of care requirements and to respond to the concerns about revenue which is one of the threshold items for standard of care that they've now stated is significantly reduced. I wanted to mention also that last week at the study session, we deferred the third quarter financial report for the Stadium Authority until, I believe it was April 23rd.
April 30th, I think.
April 30th, okay. Because we know that if they're claiming that the reduction in revenue has been reduced significantly and rapidly, we want to make sure that if there's something there in the third quarter that we see that starts to help us reveal a pattern or significant issues, that we're prepared to present that to the board on April 30th. And so we needed more time to complete the budget and get that to you. So this board will be seeing the third quarter financials, although it's important to state that staff has already seen this information, and up until the end of the third quarter, there was no pattern of rapid and significant reduction in revenue. So we actually think there might be something there in the fourth quarter that we'll look at, and we'll bring that back to the board as it's appropriate. But there has to be something there that will begin to reveal to us what has changed so rapidly and significantly, and that will be before the board in very short order.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Authority Member Chahal.
I'm continuing on the same concept, like there's a drastic difference between some of the expenses and the revenue sources of that. And pointedly, non-NFL event. For the 18-19, we have some history, right? We had $2.12 million from the concerts. And do we know how much of that was for the weekdays versus weekends?
I don't believe we've had a weekend or weekday concert in some time. So these would both be weekend concerts, or these three would be weekend concerts.
Oh.
So we probably wouldn't have had weekday concerts. Can't even talk today. Except 16, 17, I think. I can't remember when we stopped that. I think it was in 17, 18, if I recall.
18, 19, you mean to say we did not had any weekday concert?
Not that I'm
That
aware of.
number of 2.1 million?
I believe there was one. We'll have to get. I recall one where it went over
the time.
slightly. Yeah, and we issued a notice. No, it was a weekday. We'd have to get that information. We're clearly not. It's not tip of our mind.
I was trying to basically come to a reasonable number, like, because their letter says they're just blaming that on because we do not have a weekday concert avenues available to us, and that's the reason of decline in the revenue. So if we do the math, I just want to bring that figure we are projecting, their 750 versus our 4 million or 5.7 million for the 1920. So if we project that, I'm trying to be more reasonable, like it's better to be cautious and reasonable than to be projecting something which we don't have anything?
Well,
So that we are more prudent in our budgetary process.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's just
No,
they were all weekend concerts on
Yeah.
those three.
on 18, 19. And we did have, I think, 2 weekday concerts in 2017, 2018. And you can see the net revenue for concerts in 2017, 2018 is 1.8 million. And in the next year, when we didn't have any weekday concerts, the net revenue was higher, 22.1. So naturally, we've been asking them for data as to why they're stating that it's the lack of weekday concerts that's driving a reduction in revenue, when last year when we had no weekday concerts, we had higher revenue than the prior year where we had weekday concerts. So it's just not, there's just no
It's more,
monetary or numerical.
right. It's more
back up.
multi-factored than just the
One
curfew
thing,
itself.
right.
And I just want to say that in a very early conversation in my tenure in December 2017, I had the conversation with the management company because I knew the curfew issue was a significant matter for them that had been very publicly discussed. And the strategy and what should be reflected in the marketing plan is, and where we would be able to see the metrics around that is, how many concerts are they bidding for or trying to attract, and then the numbers of what becomes successful. And we don't have data for that in the marketing plan, but that data set is very revealing in terms of meeting the standard of care, as well as knowing the market and how the market is responding to Levi Stadium in order to know where adjustments need to be made. And that's information that we believe in the KPIs should help inform decision-making and strategies around the curfew.
That's the reason I'm trying to deep dive into the analysis so that we have more accurate figure what we can come up with, rather coming up with a hypothetical number on that. And my second question is on the SBL sales and services. That's, again, there's a difference of $1.2 million on that. So if I recall last meeting, we did say that as per our management agreement, they can have a SBL sales and services of, a lot of this is from the buffet part of it and other stuff. And we did mention that as per the management agreement, that's a true cost, like it has to be taken care of. So we still are not taking care of that, like we still are reducing our expenses on that.
Their position was that it was in the agreement, and we want to do a little bit more due diligence into that, because we also have to look at our internal records and as well as look at the agreement and validate that before we put it into the budget. It could be based on other information that they're bringing it forward, and we just want to make sure that that it is directly assigned in an agreement as an obligation.
Okay. So, but I understand last time we said, okay, it is as per the part of the agreement, we have to incorporate the expense for the buffet or something like that?
We thought because they mentioned that it was in the agreement, so obviously they're citing a legal source of documentation, that if that was validated through our confirmation, that of course we'll bring it forward. If we are legally obligated to provide for, then that's something that we committed to, as bringing budget adjustments as we can validate them.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that we just accept their word for it. We have to go back and do our due diligence and look at if these commitments were made legally and if they're binding, or were they just casual agreements. As much of what we have seen, it's just the years have built up certain practices that in some cases they're valid, in other cases they need to be improved and adhere to the agreement.
And my last one is on the SBL proceeds, like we have a $464K difference on that. So do we know, like, how is that difference coming up between our projections versus Manco projections? 25.8 million versus $24.4 million? That 464K?
Are you looking at this sheet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Maybe,
That's the second, if you go rightmost column, the second 464K difference.
oh, the 464.
Right.
So they're saying we're going to get more than we actually put in. Our budget was already done by the
Oh,
time.
okay.
Ours
that
is
they actually did
conservative,
that.
and it's based on averages over the past couple of
Right.
years. Tyler's bringing those numbers up.
Yeah, so if we come out more on revenues, that's good, right? So,
Right.
like I said, the executive director told you we received this today.
Mm-hmm.
So there was just, the budget was already published, and so we would have to do a budget amendment. But again, if you have more revenues, it's always better,
Yeah,
right?
I'm just trying to find out what can be the reasons for this thing.
You know,
that's the only reason.
that was their original estimate, is what we have in our, we were carrying in our budget. So I'm not sure, they didn't give us a description of why that changed
No.
when they submitted it today.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other authority members? Authority Member Watanabe.
Thank you, Chair. You know, I know we've already been through it, and you're basically just reiterating what you shared with us last week, Angie, and appreciate it because it's a lot of numbers, and you know, it's you know, I've gone through the letters, I've reread through the letters, and the basically the paper trail that that our executive director put together in an attempt to gather all the information that was necessary to put together a budget, and not just something was requested overnight, but's been going back for months, and it makes, you know, good sense. And because you know, that requested information would have helped you gather the KPIs, to be able to put together the data, to be able then to help put together a plan that's going to make this public asset, once again, a public asset that requires a lot of accountability, make it a profitable venue, you know, in our city. And that's what it was intended to do. I mean, it's a $1.3 billion asset that's making $175,000 next year. Doesn't really make sense, does it now? But I think what needs to be done. I mean, I mean, it's been shown in the past what's been successful, and we need to come up with a plan, and the only way you're going to come up with a plan is by working together, and to make this asset successful, and not just for us, but for the tenant as well. And I just hope that, you know, based on everything that's coming forward, that we're able to do whatever needs to be done, to be diligent once again to make this asset, public asset, you know, successful. Thank you.
Any other speakers? I just want to say it's pretty simple. We don't have really any new information than we did from last week. So not on the curfew issue or the loss of revenue from the curfew issue. Not on any additional information on the buffet or any of those additional expenses. We just don't have any information, and there are no Manco representatives here this evening to answer any questions. So the only change I see really in our budget is the 200,000 went down to 110 in the expenses. I just want to make sure that we end up putting it in the motion that we don't process any payments until we make sure that it's each payment is verified by backup documentation and contracts to make sure that they comply with state law and other issues. So so it's, you know, repeat of last week is what I see here. I do look forward to getting the information on the fourth quarter of 2018-19 to see the dramatic loss of revenue in one quarter. I'm anxious to see what that will be, and that fourth quarter ends, I guess, this weekend, right? So we should get that shortly, and yeah, so I'm looking for Authority Member Chahal, you have additional comments? Go ahead.
Thank you. So I was reading the letter we got and the other impacts of curfew, basically. We did had the survey done. So I think because ultimately, if we want to get some revenue into our general fund for the interest of like, as 30 member Watanabe mentioned, it's a $1.3 billion asset, and we need to make money out of it. For the sake of clarity, I think it's our duty to make sure we are clarifying on if that is the contention, like curfew issue is a big contention, after we had the survey done, I think we have to make that clarity done, whether we are ready for opening up weekday concerts or we are not ready to open that, at least for clarity's sake, now that we have done the survey, we have all the data with us. So it becomes our duty, I think, that we need to make that clear. That should not be an excuse by Manco that, oh, we are not making, this is the reason. We should make it clear and then come up with, okay, this is what we project. Okay, we'll give you 3 days, we'll give you 2 days, we give you 5 days a year. And at least they cannot have that excuse then. So I think it's authorities should be clarifying that point on this one. That's my point. Thank you.
I'd just like to comment, because this was my first assignment coming into the city of Santa Clara. And my understanding, and as it was scoped out, is that the baseline survey data was not intended in its own sole focus to be about the curfew. In fact, I think the board, in its wisdom, decided to look at the neighborhood impacts and just do an assessment of all conditions with the neighborhoods in proximity to the Levi Stadium as well as citywide, to really understand where are we, given that the Stadium Authority had not established baseline information to inform policy decision-making. And so the work that we put together and presented in late last year was informative, or mid last year, was informative for more than just in the decisions around the curfew. And in fact, if you look at last night, and I'm not claiming as if job entirely well done, but significant improvement, that data is directly related to our deployment model that we have been employing and that we have shared in granular level with this board, of addressing neighborhood impacts, which is related to the survey data that we have in baseline, so that in the future, as we continue to improve our deployment models, and we've spent the last year with new deployment model strategies, and I've now said before this board many times, this is not just a police matter, this is a multi-department deployment model. And so I have to take issue with the fact that they use that survey in direct connection to the curfew only, because my understanding of that work was to look at the whole set of conditions and the services that we provide. And I feel strongly that's how I've implemented that direction over the past year. And I think it showed last night with the previous soccer games and the issues that came, and last night's soccer game. And we have some issues. I will be the first to acknowledge those. But there was a lot more calm, and that's a direct relationship to the survey and our deployment model. And I think in fact, I remember this board saying, once we get that right, more decision-making can come.
And that's exactly what I mean. Like, now that we have a history, we have some records of the past history, how we are doing on multifaceted. I'm not only talking about the curfew. So what decision we are making to make this a successful entity for our general fund. That's my...
It is not complete for them to characterize that baseline data and that survey as a direct relationship to only the curfew. It was my charge to be more holistic, and that's what I've done in support of that data and in support of direct direction from the board.
Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure we agree to that we have to make it clarified. Even if we say no, we're not going to hold any weekday curfew. Let's be clear. Clarify that, okay, this is the issue, we won't have any weekday curfew. That's my point, like we have to clarify that, because if we have to work together, I think we need to communicate. I know we are saying we are not getting some data from them, a lot of data from them, but it's a both ways
I think it's, I don't think it's both ways. This is a development permit condition that they agreed to well before they were in action with non-NFL events. And the board has stated that it has significant issues with neighborhood impacts. And so I want to be clear in terms of the relationship of this isn't a policy, this is a condition that they accepted in the development permit. And they represented themselves in many ways that they could still maximize revenue and that they had the expertise. And this board has been clear in understanding baseline data of neighborhood impacts and its desire to try to resolve those issues. And I just think that when we talk about those issues, it's not framed in just sometimes the most simplest terms or characterized as something that can be changed. This was something they knew going into their non-NFL event promotions.
Thank you. I also want to say that, the stadium, historically, the stadium was open in 2014, but the team in the city in 2010 put that in as it was a condition of development, as the stadium executive director had mentioned. The curfew was a compromise. It was a compromise that concerts can play later on the weekends. It was a compromise to the neighborhood, but must stop at 10 o'clock on the weekdays so that people can get a decent night's sleep and go to work, and the kids can go to school for a decent hour. So, it's already been brought to the stadium authority and the city. Do we want to change the curfew for the benefit of the 49ers and the stadium promoters at the expense of our residents? And this board said no. And I know that most of us have pledged to support the existing development condition of approval and the curfew, either during the stadium campaign, and that was the reason, the compromise to get the events to take place on, at least some on the weekday and some on the weekend. And all of us, I believe most of us in our council campaigns said we were going to support the curfew the way it stands now. So Authority Member Chahal, if you want to propose changing that, I know you're interested in data. We've asked the 49ers, our executive director has asked the 49ers to give us data to show that we are losing revenues because of, not having concerts on the weekdays. And you would have thought they would, if that was so important, they would bring that data forward. We've gotten nothing that backs up those claims. So without any data, with, being involved with the stadium from day one and making the compromise with the neighborhoods, it doesn't make any sense to change anything with no information and to disrupt the neighborhood for the benefit of people other than the community. It makes no sense. So, but if you want to push something forward, that's certainly up to you. Put it on the agenda and we'll talk about it and circulate it in the neighborhood. And it's not really a matter of just the city council or the stadium authority board making a decision. There's a whole process you have to go through if you're going to change a condition of development. The Manco and the 49ers, they knew from day one what they had agreed to. They said they had the expertise to manage stadiums. There was no objection for years, no objection to it until recently, and they're objecting with no backup information whatsoever. In fact, one of the promoters that has claimed that we should be having these concerts on the weekdays is one of the promoters that for one of the concerts we lost over $2 million. He's the promoter on that same concert. So I have a lot of questions, but look forward to the data if they can show us how we're not benefiting because of the weekday concerts. But I've been here when we've had the weekday concerts that have gone 1, 2, 3 hours past the curfew, and when you start getting complaints from your residents, you've got to put our residents first. We have to put our residents first. We made those promises. It was condition of approval. So I know you continue to bring this up, but if you want to make something more formal, then put it on the agenda. Council Authority Member Watanabe.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to say a lot of what you've said, but at the same time, most importantly than anything else, is that the North Side residents should always be the top priority. And there's a reason why in 2010, this city council, which is way before my time, but that city council agreed to the curfew, and it was also a condition that the 49ers agreed to as well, because once again, it was established and agreed to protect the neighborhoods and their quality of life. If the 49ers are concerned about revenue, there's 52 weekends a year. And it's been established that weekend events are just as profitable and can be as profitable as a weekday event. And if they would just sit down and meet with our staff, come up with a plan. I mean, it's with anything else, if you want something to be successful, you figure out what works and what doesn't work. And there's ways to be able to figure that out. And I think with a history's been established that would help see what would make the to answer those questions. And it's just but at the same time, there's a reason why, the curfew was put in place. Taylor Swift doesn't live in the North Side. U2 doesn't live in the North Side. They all get to go home, but the people are still there, and the people have to deal with the repercussions of events going until 11 o'clock at night, families trying to go to sleep, dealing with traffic, helicopters, all kinds of issues. I hear about it. It's my district now. So I probably know those people out there a lot more than basically everybody else with the exception of the mayor. I know those people out there a lot more. And even in District 2, I get comments from people in District 2 that are appreciative of the fact that this council has stood by the curfew and not deviated from it. And I appreciate those comments, and those are the reasons why I need to stand up for those residents, District 1, District 2, because more than anybody else, those are the people that are impacted. There's a reason why there's a curfew. There's 52 weekends a year. People want to make this stadium successful. There's ways to get it done. People just need to come to the table and sit down and talk about it and use past data to establish that kind of a plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Authority Member O'Neill.
Thank you. So this discussion of the curfew kind of, to me, pulls, it points to two issues. And one of them is, we've alluded to the community outreach effort that we had, that we spent, I hate to always be saying we spent a lot of money on it, but, it was one of the first efforts that Authority Director Santana led, and I thought we got a lot of very interesting information there. And so, the curfew was just one element of something. There was a lot of information in that report. And one of the things that we have been working on is trying to improve the public safety aspect. And I'm glad that we're doing that. And I hope as we have some time, maybe some bandwidth is freed up. I know it's very tight and precious, that we can look at some of the other aspects. And so obviously one of the things was the curfew. So the other part of our discussion that the curfew issue points to for me is this whole idea of the marketing plan. And I don't know, initially, I don't think at the time that there was analysis, and we have been so tied up with just, kind of getting the stadium built and the operation of it to really look and say, in terms of marketing, how much of the revenue model really is depending upon those very large scale events. what is a reasonable expectation to have for how many events you're going to have? Like, I've said to folks, and admitting my age, about like when I was like a teenager or in my 20s, there were a lot more of these very large stadium events. There's not, then this is kind of some of the marketing analysis. How many artists are capable of attracting that big a crowd? Looking at comparable facilities, how many big concerts a year do they have? All of that is the kind of information that I would want to have. But I think in a more robust marketing plan, we would be comparing against comparable facilities in comparable population areas, and to say, because when you look at, and now we're going to have another arena opening next fall. The really high volume events are at places like Oracle Arena, the Shark Tank, and probably the Chase Center in San Francisco, and other venues. It's but that's information that we've talked about, and I've mentioned to even members of the Manco staff, those kinds of questions. And so to me, it just kind of, and I don't mean to sound too critical, but it's one of the things that to me points to some of the inadequacy of the plan that we have in front of us. Because then if I could look at it and say, okay, this is what happens at the LA Coliseum, or this is what happens in New York at the stadium that's in New Jersey, it was MetLife Stadium, or this is what happens, the fact that it's an open air stadium, looking at all those factors so that we have a better basis of knowledge to know. Like I said, I'm concerned now that perhaps with the financial modeling that was done by Manco and Stadco, that their modeling, which perhaps was not shared with the Stadium Authority, may be much more dependent on having those very large scale events. But I don't know that, so that, to me, this is part of this whole inadequacy of what we're dealing with here. And like I said, I am concerned about the drops in numbers. But I think, once again, if we're really going to be making informed decisions and to get into the other aspects of the report that we got, I think it was last June, from the team that worked on the outreach effort, I think we would need to make a change, even though, like I said, the kind of data points that I'm talking about, those are the kinds of things that I think help you make a real informed decision. To say to the public, okay, yeah, the other stadiums in other cities that are returning millions of dollars to the cities have these kinds of events of this size, and this is what they make on them. And I know everyone's very cagey about who's making what and how much money is made off of concessions or T-shirts or whatever, which we haven't had a good handle on. But really, the only artists that I'm sure we've all gotten those telephone calls from people at the promoters that, and when they talk about it, but that this is really hampering them. But the only example that I heard was a possibility was Ed Sheeran. And I know when they called to talk to me, I didn't even know who he was. Once again, showing my age. So I guess it didn't have as much impact, like, oh, who's that? But I understand that he is I do know who he is now. But, so like if somebody said, hey, we've got a chance to have the latest really hot group come, but they can only come on a Thursday. But, no one's even come to say that. I haven't heard anything since Ed Sheeran. And we've gotten some big, we've had Beyonce, we've had Taylor Swift, we're getting the Rolling Stones, and they're all coming on the weekends. So I don't know. I would just say if somebody would, like I said, if we had a plan that had that kind of analytics, it would be easier to, if that change was needed to make that, to justify that change.
Well, we've started to get a little bit of information through our own information that we have started to see which events are making money, which ones are not, which would drive a marketing plan as well. But we did we did voice our concerns about the marketing plan during the study session. We asked, did we get any response, Executive Director? Did we get any response from Manco on our comments about the marketing plan and what we'd like to see in the marketing plan since last Tuesday?
Their letter states it's on page 4. So they refer to my request to have them watch the board discussion, and I had already informed them of the issues that I raised in my presentation. And they restate what they heard, and then their responses, and hopefully they're watching this evening, because I think
I'm sure they are.
Board Member O'Neill brought up some good points, but their response was, we do not believe that the non-NFL events marketing plan should be amended in response to any of these comments. However, if the Stadium Authority Board or staff has specific amendments to propose, we would be happy to consider them. So I'm hearing, even from the board and from tonight's discussion, that there are some amendments that they should consider in hopes of trying to reach mutual agreement.
Okay. All right. Teresa?
Well, at this point, I don't know that, we've got any other data to really consider. So I would like to make a motion to recommend that we adopt the Santa Clara Authority fiscal year 2019-20 operating debt service and capital budget, and that we approve the stadium operations and maintenance plan, but excluding the marketing plan, because we want to. And that we approve the Stadium Authority compliance and management policy.
You did say except the marketing plan, right?
Except for the marketing plan.
I'll second that.
Kathy, can you please turn on your microphone?
Apologize. That it recommend approving the budget, but we don't process any payments without proper contracts pursuant to state law. That was the statement that was made.
Well, so if we want to add that, I was going to look at that separately, but that's fine. If you want, I'll accept that. I'm not sure if the city attorney has should we divide those?
For the board's consideration, there is a new document that was submitted to the collateral trustee regarding the stadium operations budget, that if you could refer that to the attorney and I, so that we could understand any implications to the significant changes that were made this afternoon and submitted without coordinating with the Stadium Authority.
Because that's
I'd just like to be directed to,
right.
The board knows that we need to look into this and bring back to the board if there's any issues.
Okay, so I do have a second, so I'll go ahead. So, because
is the second okay with that?
Yes.
So on this, I thought that the Stadium Authority was the entity that submitted the budget, not the management company. Because I thought that in years past, when we were, kind of on a race to get things done, it was because that we were supposed to submit it.
In the agreement, the stadium manager submits the cash budget. Our budget's accrual budget that we submit to the board to get appropriation authority. So we can't spend anything unless you, as the board, approve that. And then they submit separately the trust budget.
Okay, to the
which is
funders.
A cash, yeah. So they submit it directly to the trust.
Okay, thank you. So do we want to include, Mr. Doyle, should we include any of these restrictions on paying contracts in the same motion? What would be your preference?
I mean, you can certainly do that if you'd like. I think we're just kind of informing you that previously, these bills have been paid through when you get the bills and claims on your agenda, the line items for payment are there. My understanding is a lot of times, some of these payments have already been made. I'm not really sure what the timing is on all this. We're telling you that we don't intend on following past practice that was inherited from the prior administration, which was to to pay without seeing the contracts. That's just a very poor fiscal control, and we're not going to do that anymore. And I think it would help to have the authority direct us to not even submit such things unless we have not even submit requests for payment until we have a complete record of justification for those payments.
Okay, so I would rather have that to be in a separate motion.
Well, let's
I
do
think.
that and maybe.
Let's do that a separate motion.
Let's do that separately because
Yeah.
I was also going to ask the board that we instruct, although a letter has already gone out, instruct the executive director or attorney to get copies of all non-NFL contracts that have taken place. Oh, we can do it there
okay.
too? Should we do this one there too about processing the payments? Or that should be in the budget? Okay. So, okay, let's repeat what the motion is on the floor now.
That's up there.
And just so we know, and then you can do a second motion, Authority
Do
Member
you want me to
O'Neill.
read it again, Nora?
What I captured was the staff recommendations, and then direct executive director and legal counsel to look into Manco's Stadium Authority budget submission comparisons. Leave it at that? Or
Minus the marketing plan, but not the marketing plan.
right, and that's in the staff
Okay,
recommendation.
that's in the staff
The screen up
recommendation.
here.
Is that correct, Authority Member O'Neill?
Yes.
Okay, so
Second.
there's a motion and a second on that. Any other discussion from the authority? Authority Member Chahal?
I just want to reiterate that as you all, I'm also for analytical data. And that's the reason I was asking historically, what has been the percentage of weekend versus non-weekend data is. So I wish the Niners would have been here and we should have heard from them. I also wish that. And that's the reason, like, it is impacting everything, like marketing plan and all that. And my idea was, like, we have to make a clarity, but if we lack a data for making that clarity or curfew thing and other stuff, yeah, let's wait for the data and then we can make a decision on that. That's no problem. But ultimately, my goal is the same as others. Like, we need some data, analytical data, and we should analyze on that, and then we go from that. And total approach on that. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second, and any other discussion? Any member of the public like to speak on the motion to approve the Stadium Authority budget? Would you like to speak on the approval of the Stadium Authority budget? Yes. I'll come back to that. We had that already, but since you're here and you seem to be the only one here,
It's such a full house.
we'll accommodate you. All right, so we have a motion and a second on the motion. It's too late now, but I'll come back to you for the public presentation. Okay, that motion, I didn't vote, so how did that happen? I mean, I didn't say any, I didn't push a button. Did you all push a button?
It's up to mind reading.
Oh, okay. I'm not, did you all get something to push?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not getting it, so, but it says I approved, I guess. Okay.
It's a really advanced system then.
Are you all getting it?
Not now, but
Something's, I'm going to leave it. Today's meeting, something's going on with this thing here. Oh, no, I haven't gotten it. So I vote yes. Okay, Authority Member O'Neill, did you want to do a second? Okay, please register your vote, I guess, all of you? You have already, okay.
It was Teresa who made the motion.
I still see it on some of your screens. Okay. All right. So that passes unanimously with those in attendance. No, that's okay, 6-0.
Well, the public is.
Authority Member O'Neill?
So I think the last thing that we wanted to do was to, I would like to make a motion that we, to go on record that the authority board directs staff to not pay any additional invoices, for services or whatever, or any invoices that, unless there is backup documentation with contracts or other evidence that the actual either services have been performed to an acceptable standard or that the merchandise has been actually received.
Would it be this item, if I could ask the maker of the motion to add on, or the next item, that we get all, we instruct staff to get all contracts from all?
Why don't we just provide when the board is ready to provide a verbal comment about the next item?
Okay, we'll do that then.
We've filed
Okay.
an information report.
So we have a motion. Was there a second for Authority Member O'Neill's? Is there a second? Motion and a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion on that part of the motion? Authority Member Chahal? Okay, no? Okay, any member of the public want to speak on this particular motion? Oh, yes, Authority Member
But
Hardy.
it won't come up with anything.
I know,
So
okay.
it's having issues.
Where there's issues tonight.
So I want to understand that we're asking staff not to pay anything with our standards according to our agreement. Is that right? Not to pay anything that comes in, because we budgeted some things here, but we have to have this documentation, is what you're saying.
Supporting document.
I'm happy to provide a verbal overview of the next item. I think there's a lot happening in terms of the budget at once and the supporting information that's also colliding with the breach of agreement and the accelerated audit. And so I'm happy to go into that item after you complete this vote, and then you can consider the motion to understand its context.
My concern is I just don't want to have an unintended consequence of hampering staff in doing something that needs to be done.
The budget authority with the approval of the budget this evening will be in place.
Okay.
It's the due diligence and operationalizing corrective action that comes next, and that's a lot falls into the next item.
Okay. But I'm okay.
So there's a motion and a second.
I think Raj wants to say something.
Sorry.
No. So I thought
Yes.
it's not working, yeah. So should we hold that motion till we hear about because you mentioned they are
That's what- yeah.
correlated.
Yeah.
Should we hold that motion so
That's
that we have
fine.
more clarity and then we vote on that?
You may have additional direction, so.
Right,
That's what I'm
I
saying.
do about getting the
Right,
contracts.
so
but,
should we hold that vote
Yeah.
for now and then we can bring it back?
That's a great idea.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just
fine.
a little.
Okay, let's go to the next item, which is informational report regarding notice of breach of agreement and audit of stadium manager delegated procurement authority.
This item was originally placed on the agenda as the corrective action for the violation of the stadium management agreement and the city code with respect to Next Systems. If you recall, on February 19th, staff came before the board and asked for the board to approve a contract in the approximate amount of about $650,000 for some floor coating work that had been completed without seeking the board's approval. Under the current state of agreements and the code, anything over $250,000 requires that the management company come to the board and get its approval to enter into contract to complete the work. And the stadium manager brought to my attention in November that action had not occurred. although the work had already begun. And we had already paid invoices off of it because, as what's already been acknowledged, this organization has not been in practice of getting contracts from the stadium manager in order to pay invoices. We did make an effort in when we heard about this in November, December timeframe to get all the contracts so that we could begin to implement our own corrective action, and that has not occurred. I've removed the next system off of the agenda because when the board asked us to go back and do more due diligence, the conditions surrounding this procurement are pretty revealing with respect to issues of compliance with the code, with public procurement, and I guess equally as important, I was going to say more importantly, the prevailing wage the state statutes with prevailing wage. And in a conversation last Thursday with the stadium manager, through asking for documentation after a series of emails, it became clear that the compliance with the state prevailing wage and the milestones that need to be complete in order to demonstrate compliance, there just wasn't that knowledge base to even know how to comply. And so I've removed the next system from the agenda, and I recommended, because I understand that the vendor wants to be paid, I recommended to the stadium manager that they cure the payment part on their part, to just remove that as an element as we go forward and look at compliance with public works contracts that are guided by state law, our public procurement delegated agreements, delegated authority in our agreements, as well as the code, to understand what is the magnitude of compliance and where are the corrective actions. And so part of my recommendation, as included in your packet, is that we accelerate an audit. Ultimately, this is the stadium authority who delegated its authority to the stadium manager. As you know, there's been no oversight, and we've not seen the contract, so we cannot speak to the current state of compliance with public procurement processes. And I think it's important that this board support that effort to look at accelerated auditing, so that if there is any issues that we need to correct, and I suspect there's probably going to be a number of issues, that we get started on that so that we can move forward and make sure that we're still operationalizing and expending and maintaining the stadium. Brian, you may want to talk to you.
Well, we did, upon hearing this, this pretty apparent lack of adherence to both the purchasing code that the management agreement requires the stadium manager to adhere to, as well as just a complete lack of understanding on their part of what actual prevailing wage regulations required. It was important that I immediately issue a notice of breach to the main stadium manager, because the stadium authority is the actual entity that is subject to the state law. So we cannot be out of compliance with state law as a public entity, especially the labor code, which protects workers' rights. And so immediately last Thursday, I issued a notice of breach to the stadium manager, and they have the opportunity under the management agreement to cure that breach within 30 days. So we will see if they can cure it or not. I don't know whether they can.
I just want to add for the record, we have put them on notice that unless they are able to demonstrate compliance, we will not be paying invoices. Because these are public funds, and I have no authority unless you're in compliance with state law to release public funds. And the second is I asked them for a copy of all of their contracts by April 12th. And we were able to set a meeting for April 10th to begin to review processes and understand what levels of compliance they've been able to implement and where the gaps are.
And on the particular breach involving the next contract, we received a letter from the stadium manager's attorney, the Coblin's firm, requesting to discuss the matter. So we'll be responding to them, but we will not be waiving our right to have them cure the breach. Um, the other part that the Stadium Authority Board should be aware of is that under the procurement code, which the stadium manager is subject to, 1730.150 of the city code, if they violate the policy in the chapter governing purchasing, then the contract is voidable. And so we may seek to void this contract at a future date if we determine that it was not properly procured.
So we've been asking for documents for years, and I believe we're still in court. That's one of our court issues, to get the documents from Manco on the non-NFL events. And I saw that the executive director sent a letter saying she was requesting all contracts, since we have not seen any contracts besides security, concession, and parking. I think those are the only ones that have come to the Stadium Authority Board over the last 5 years. So do you need any authority from us? I know the letter's already been sent to make sure they're in compliance with state law. Do you need anything from us on that front?
Let me just also bring to your attention City Code Section 1730.160B. That says the executive director shall prepare and submit to the Stadium Authority Board a report at the end of the Stadium Authority's fiscal year, summarizing the total number of contracts let by the Stadium Authority, the number of contracts approved under an exception, the number of contracts approved under best value procedures, and the number of contracts approved under formal bidding procedures, and to the extent possible, listing information related to the application and outreach efforts conducted to implement the DBE program. So even at the time that this was first begun, it was definitely assumed that we would be getting copies of all these contracts. Otherwise, the executive director could not submit the report that the board was requiring in the code. I don't know why this has never been implemented in the first 4 years of the contract. We're attempting to implement this procedure, so I think by law, the stadium manager has to give us the contracts under this code section. Otherwise, it'd be in breach of the code section. But
Stadium manager.
the stadium manager, excuse me. Well, the executive director gives a report, but the executive director must have the contracts before they can give the report. So it's very, very much an implied condition of this code section. So I don't think there's much legal argument that they have to not give us the contracts, but if you'd like to tell us to get them, we'll do that.
I would like for the board to consider formal action. The record is in your packet. I've been communicating and writing on this matter since November. I referenced that our finance director asked for the information in a meeting in the November-December timeframe, the contracts. And while I've been handling it administratively, the issues are by far more significant than just getting the copies. There are real state law compliance issues here that we need to validate. And I feel that the board should take a formal action on not only getting the contracts all contracts that they've ever issued, but also on the contracts that include the non-NFL events, so that we understand what type of negotiations with respect to revenue assumptions, as well as marketing plan issues, and basically what are they doing in terms of maximizing revenue and expending their funds by way of contract. I think we're at that point, given the conversation around the budget and the issue that we're speaking to just understand how they are performing their duties as allowed for in this agreement.
Well, it sounds like there's two issues. One is how they're performing their duties. The second, or should be 1A, is how are they complying with state law?
Right.
So you need a motion to get all contracts from
All contracts,
2000 from the opening of this
non-NFL events.
all contracts regarding the operations and management and operations of the stadium?
Yes.
Like what's the proper language?
There's two sets of contracts I think we're talking about here. One is under the code section that allows them to be the purchasing agent for the stadium authority itself, and so those are basically contracts for supplies, materials, and equipment. and Services and Public Works. So all of those, I think, are due to us so that we can make sure that they've complied with the code. And then the second set of contracts are so that we can understand how the stadium is operating in terms of booking non-NFL events. So the non-NFL events, those are the contracts with third parties to hold events at the stadium. So two
So
sets
for
of contracts.
purposes of a motion, what
We'd like
would you-
both. We'd
Those
like
two.
both
Those
of
two
them.
items.
Will someone make that motion on this board? I just, if you understand what our Stadium Authority attorney has said.
So for purposes of a motion, administratively, and as I mentioned, this is, some of this has been going on for several months, for the executive director and the Stadium Authority Council to receive copies of all contracts let under the delegated procurement authority, under the code and in the agreement, as well as all contracts that the stadium manager has entered into for non-NFL events, both ticketed and non-ticketed events. That's the first part of just, let's get the contracts. The second part is because of the issues that surfaced with Next Systems and our own admission of what processes have been put in place for payment.
Is this a second motion?
This is the second part of the motion, is to
part of
no
the
longer
motion.
issue payment unless it's substantiated by the appropriate documents that support compliance and the proper release of public funds.
That's when you were trying to
Yeah,
do
that you were
before.
making before, but with the, yeah.
So should I, let's see here, so I will,
I heard Nora typing.
Yeah, I did.
I can hear clicking away.
I heard her typing on the first
So-
part of the motion.
So this, it's like I already covered the second part of the
Yeah, right,
motion.
Right.
So if I can amend my motion to include that, also that the Stadium Authority staff request or require the management company to make copies available to the Stadium Authority staff of all contracts that have been entered into related to the non-NFL events and to the general operation and maintenance of the stadium.
For our possession.
Yes, okay, for copies, that copies be
Immediately.
provided to the Stadium Authority.
Time frame.
What about a time frame?
Yeah, time frame.
I have stated April 12th as
That's
their deadline.
by April 12th?
Well,
And-
We'll be consistent.
is that all contracts that have been since the stadium's opened? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay, I want to make certain I know what we're asking
It's
for.
since 2014, because that's when when the stadium opened, and they actually became responsible for the operation. And also the original motion, which was to not pay any more invoices without receiving proper documentation to include contracts or purchase orders, bid information, so that we can know that we would be properly releasing public funds.
We have that, Nora?
Let me read
Is
it
my
back to you.
second agree to the amendment?
Right.
You
And
agree,
did we need
Kathy?
to include the language pursuant to state law? I know several people have mentioned it. We need to have it.
Okay, well, so we'll
did
say
include the state
pursuant to
law. You
public
have it?
contract law or any,
Yeah.
city and state law
Mm-hmm.
on public contracts.
For public funds.
I have direct executive director and stadium authority attorney receive copies of all contracts delegated, as well as all contracts that have been entered into agreement by executive director. Direct staff not to pay additional invoices for services unless there is backup documentation of services rendered and also be in compliance with state law. Request all contracts which have been issued and to also include non-NFL event contracts by April 12, 2019, since the opening of the stadium in 2014.
The attorney?
You
I
said
mean,
issued by executive director, it should be issued by stadium manager.
Stadium manager.
Important that we get this right.
yes.
Motion?
Kathy, second.
Second.
Authority Member Hardy, did you have a comment on the motion?
Yes, I want to make certain I understand because I heard the attorney make a comment that the contracts were voidable if any of this, if we were determining that they were not legal, that was making the contracts void. Did you mean their contracts with their contractor or with us? I wanted to make certain I understood that.
Well, in delegating the authority at the time that this was delegated through the Second Amendment of the, or I forget which amendment, but one amendment of the management agreement, the Stadium Authority Board delegated to the stadium manager, Manco, the authority that the executive director had to enter into contracts on behalf of the stadium authority. So it actually, it's kind of a pretty given legal principle. If a principal delegates or authorizes an agent to enter into a contract under certain criteria, under certain legal requirements, and the agent doesn't comply with those legal requirements, then the principal can say, well, that contract is void because the agent was acting outside its authority. And so it's just simply recognition of that basic principle of principal and agent, that the agent must act within the authority of the principal. And what it does is it says, okay, well, if you were acting outside the stadium authority's authority that was given to you, then the stadium authority should not be responsible for the obligations of that contract, and the agent will have to absorb whatever costs are incurred by having issued that contract.
Thank you.
Thank you. Authority Member Mahan.
Yeah, just two minor points of clarification. I don't know if you captured compliance with state law and city code, and is this just the contracts for non-NFL events?
It's two-part. It's it's copies of contracts for the stadium authority's delegated procurement authority to the stadium manager.
So those that have been delegated.
Those that
okay.
have been delegated. And then it's separate, the non-NFL events for ticketed and non-ticketed
Okay.
events.
Correct. I just want to make sure that that's the scope.
Yeah.
Okay. So if that's captured in the, yeah.
Not yet. Pretty soon. We're almost there. All right. Authority Member Hardy. Authority Member Mahan, do you have, no? Authority Member Chahal.
Yep.
I'm going down the list. Chahal.
Okay. So I just want to, I know you answered part of the question I had. So I just want to make sure it's not in any conflict with whatever agreement we have with them, signed agreement we have with them right now. Whatever we're asking is not in any way conflict.
It's in compliance
Okay.
with. Yeah.
That's right. Thank you.
Authority Member Watanabe.
Thank you. I just have a question. You mentioned earlier, Executive Director, about doing an audit. Would that audit be done once you receive the documents? So you're wanting to contemplate an audit on those documents?
Thank you for the question, because I wanted to add a little bit of context at the appropriate time. I will be prepared to bring forward the contracts under the provision 17.30160 that the attorney just read out around my requirement to come and report out on contracts that I've issued. So I'm preparing that report for myself on April 30th to the board. But if I receive the documents on April 12th, I will not be able to turn them around in a week for that fiscal year. And so I need to sort through them and bring back at the appropriate time how I can comply with this provision. I can tell you in my conversation with them last week, I felt like they were going to struggle to meet that provision, and they as much said that. So we'll see where we're at, and I'll report on April 30th how far we can get and what my estimated timeline is based on the documents I get on the 12th.
Thank you.
Authority Member Chahal, you're still up? Okay. All right. Anyone else? All right. We have a motion and a second on the floor. It's a very long motion. Is there any member of the public wanting to speak on this motion? You want to speak on this motion? Yes? Okay, please come forward.
have a motion about compliance and corrective procedures. Maybe we should invite, I don't think I've recognized Jacob Malai lately, but the field's operation division, maybe he can get promoted as Jacob Valbuena or Jacob Martinez. With maybe you can create a business card for him, and he can also, under his belt, or I mean under his stars and bars, maybe he's a deputy hearing officer also in San Jose. There's also rehabilitation officers and deputy fire supervisors, but I think Jacob can pass for a Jacob Martinez and Jacob Valbuena in uniform. And from 83 to 93, I was always writing with a lead pencil, always in a pencil, aside from art class. And at the age of 18, our mothers and fathers told the rule was, you know, you're out of the house. So at the age of 18, I started writing with the ink pen. And since then, today, I guess, I don't know. I've been in men's clothing. We wear a size 44 is the biggest size, and since aside from that, you know, size 44. I'll just put it to a halt right there. But like driving along the city of Santa Clara and outside the city into the county, Tasman, wherever. I think it would. Half of my life I was inside a hospital, and for your you know Obama and Palin and McCain and Romney and Bush and Obama, the ceremony I was in the hospital on the 5th floor. But today, because I'm a graduate, and I think I recognize the Comerica Bank along Maria Lane and El Camino, Wolf, and Panda Express could relocate to Cherry Sushi. Don't know what we're building in the Bank of America parking lot there, but I think Panda Express could relocate to Cherry Sushi. We can also have a sister Panda Express across the street, and the Lee's Kitchen can relocate behind Chili's. And we can wipe out, you know, King Noodle in Santa Clara and King Noodle in San Jose. And it doesn't happen immediately, but I think another reason why I'm here is because for the public to take a stand and fill out speaker cards, sometimes because we're at headquarters, I also have a headquarters in my neighborhood, and I think that's I could only pinpoint headquarters here and headquarters where I am, and
Okay.
I'm fair. I have a fair game going on, and I'm not violating anybody. So that's how I
good.
work. Yeah,
Okay.
so.
Well, thank you so much for your testimony, and thank you for coming down this evening. Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the floor. I have it. Please register your vote. And that passes unanimously of those in attendance. Thank you very much. And thank you to the staff and everyone for all the information on both of these items. We very much appreciate it. So next we have reports of members and special committees. Is there anybody that would like to speak? Authority member? Anyone want to speak?
Sure.
Authority member Watanabe?
Sure. I had, let's see, I had the pleasure of going to the Grand Boulevard Initiative meeting this morning up in San Carlos, and seeing what, how they've been working with, the cities of Palo Alto and Redwood City are working on changes to their El Camino plans, and I actually, one of our planning department staff members was there, and I spoke to her afterwards and said, we've got a lot going on in Santa Clara right now. We've got some good ideas. So planning to sit down and see if we can't work on, use some of those ideas in Santa Clara. And then this afternoon, I was at the second meeting of the Santa Clara, Santa Cruz Airport Roundtable and down in San Jose. And very informative meeting, and actually the next meeting is going to be here in Santa Clara. It's in April. It's in late April, and anyway, maybe we can put the information out there. Maybe it would be good to get it out in the city manager's blog and get people involved, because it's an important issue, and this is a lot to learn. It's a lot to know, but anyway, it's good to be a part of it, and because Santa Clara certainly is impacted by airport noise, and so it's a good way to start to make some changes. So that's all I did today, and then we came
Thank
here.
you. Okay, Executive Director report.
I wanted to thank staff again for all of their work and efforts and commitment to making sure that we were able to present the best information that we had for the board to make a decision. I also want to thank Kendra, who's in the back, who made sure that the board had the proper support to have its meeting this evening, and volunteered to be here this evening.
Thank you, Kendra, if you're listening.
And I also just want to mention that this Friday, we're having our monthly quarterly management meeting where we convene on specific professional development topics. And Friday's topic is risk management. And so we'll be spending the afternoon with all of our managers talking about risk. So
we've got a lot to talk about then this Friday.
We do. So if we're a little delayed in responding, we're in formal training. So thank you.
And thank you very much for all the support to the Stadium Authority. So that leads us to our adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn? Motion second to adjourn. Please register your vote. That passes unanimously of those present. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.